Okay, so I'm going to try to tell, or rather give a basic overview of the United States versus Assad, where we've had three U.S. presidents have conflict with this man. So, just a little bit of information on Assad. He became the leader of Syria, the head of state, after his father died in office a month prior to him taking over. His father had actually served for almost 30 years, from 1971 to 2000. Um, which is we world leaders typically let's just say it's one of the longer reigns that we've seen on behalf of someone. So it was certainly a memorable period. But again, for the sake of this, I'm just going to cover the the junior Assad. Okay, so one other thing to point out before we begin is that he in both, because they have an election every 7 years. In the 2000 election, the 2007 election, he gets 99 and 97% of the vote, which already sounds kind of weird and suspicious. Uh, and let's see here. I think that's pretty much it as far as the background stuff. I just want you to know. So he's part of a group, and we'll talk more about this on a later date. But again, U.S. relations come first. Everything else we can do at some other point. All right. So after 9/11, the Syrian government kind of doesn't want to get that involved with the war on terror. They're not seeking to really be our top ally on that. Um, in any event, the Syrian intelligence tries to get the U.S. to be aware of an Al Qaeda plan where they were trying to fly a hang glider with explosives into a U.S. Navy headquarters in Bahrain, which is Bahrain, located an island in the Persian Gulf. So a lot of these places I've never heard of. Um, and at this time, Syria operates as one of the common destinations the U.S. has its captives um, sent to be tortured. So any of us who went into torture already know how insane it is. But again, the point here is that they're on relatively friendly terms, not really conflicting with each other. Syria tries to help the U.S. out. U.S. sends its stuff over there. Um, and so when the Iraq War breaks out and Syria is like, "Hey, this is stupid," that's when the relations are kind of like going out the window. Because you know how the U.S. is. If you don't help us with our warmongering, we don't want you. So they have this contention start because Syria doesn't prevent foreign fighters from using its borders to go to Iraq, to basically fight against the U.S. And they also declined supporting people who supported the Iraqi insurgency from the former government by Saddam Hussein. So Syrian officials at the time are actually also worried about the large number of Iraqi citizens coming to the country because again they're trying to flee from the U.S. and its terror at that time. I just want to point something else out. In 2002, Bush gave a speech about the Middle East, but during this speech he called on Syria to release its, as he calls them, uh, to close the terrorist camps and expel terrorist organizations. And Syria, their response was to say this is not fair. There are a lot of their commentators, um, because the country had cooperated with the United States when it came down to hunting Al Qaeda, and their quarrel was, as they claimed, with Israel rather than the U.S. And another thing that's worth taking away from this is actually a comment by Morhaf Jujadi, a Syrian scholar in residence at the Middle East Institute in Washington, who said that for the United States, the organizations that Syria supports against Israel are viewed as terrorist organizations. He said, in the view of Syria, these are resistance movements that are legitimately fighting for liberation of their land. Palestinians are freedom fighters, says Mr. Judadi. By supporting them, so are Syrians. He believes President Bush made a serious mistake in appearing to support Aral Sharon's aggressive policies. The consequences, he said, could be explosive. The perception in Israel is that Mr. Sharon has a green light, he said. There is enticement for Sharon to go after Hezbollah positions in the south of Lebanon, possibly Syrian positions in Lebanon, and we hope not, but possibly even Syria itself, he said. So, to break this down for you, Bush's words meant nothing because Syria does not view the Palestinians as terrorists, which they're not. Israel has done a really good job of trying to make them seem like they are. And what Syria is worried about is that they'll be targeted by Israel for aiding and abetting the Palestinians, and this will result in Israel possibly, starting some war with them, and Israel's boyfriend government, the United States, coming to back them because that's how we do it. So I thought this was really interesting. It's a good breakdown by him, and just goes to show you how we have this like stern cooperation with supporting one side over the other. We don't really think for ourselves, kind of like the two-party system. In the first couple of months of 2003, Bush meets with advisors, and he, as described by them, vetoes discussion to possibly take the war on terror to Syria, with an intelligence source in Washington telling The Guardian the talk about Syria didn't go anywhere. Basically, the White House shut down the discussion. And the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, who is, like the warmonger, returning character of the last 40 years, repeated accusations in April of 2003 that Syria had tested chemical weapons in the last 12 to 15 months. However, Syria, this is what The Guardian says, Syria is not a signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention and would not be breaking international law if it did possess, nor is it suspected of selling chemical weapons to others. Also, I just want to add this in here as well. It was July of 2003 when Bush warned Syria and Iran concurrently that they will be held accountable if they fail to cooperate more with the administration's campaign against terrorism, and said it was time for governments across the Middle East to support the efforts by the Palestinian and Israeli prime ministers at the time to fight terror in all its forms. And this includes those two governments he added. So I just want to clarify I don't know if that's the same speech, but those are also more kind of like standoffish type comments with Syria. So the early part of 2003 is a really notable period for U.S. and Syria relations, because in April of that year, Bush praised Syria as beginning to get the message by cooperating against terrorists, reflecting Syrian vows to seal its border with Iraq and to work to locate fugitives from Saddam Hussein's government. But by June of that year, early June, at the Middle East Peace Summit, Bush said Syria needed to do more in the war on terrorism. And after that, his administration officials expressed disagreement that Syria had not carried through on its pledge, with White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan saying that Syria and Iran are continuing to do things that are unhelpful. And another person in Bush's administration saying that neither country has made the fundamental, irrevocable choice of which side they are going to be on in the war on terror. You're either with us or against us. Yeah. So one other thing to take away from the Bush era of this is that in May of 2004, these sanctions were imposed. It was called the Syria Accountability and Lebanese Sovereignty Restoration Act. And this banned the majority of exports to Syria with the exception of food and medicine, and specifically, we hear this, prohibited the export of goods containing more than 10% of US manufactured component parts to Syria. Um, this is a big deal because guess what president who is supposed to be hope and change follows Bush and brings these back 6 years later? Yeah, that one. So, people can keep trying to pretend as if there's some huge difference. I don't see it. So, after the Lebanese prime minister gets assassinated, the U.S. recalls its ambassador to Syria back to Washington. This is all part of the pattern of just down, 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 down. And I should also mention that there's actually an interview from 2006 where Assad is asked about the U.S. trying to enact regime change on him and get rid of him. And I want to point this out because in the current era of Trump, people like to pretend as if a lot of the problems of the world stage and whatnot all occurred under him and everything was hunky dory and perfect, or if it wasn't, it became that when Obama was in office. And that's just not true. I think personally, it's the exact same stuff, just with an uglier face, and people pay more attention to it than they would um, under any normal circumstance because it's Trump, and he doesn't have that same smooth talker thing going that Obama did, or in this case Bush. But we're getting to the Obama years. So it's coming up. So the U.S. embassy gets attacked by four Syrian terrorists in September of 2006. And distinctively, the Syrian government declines to go push for a motive, and Assad at the time blames American foreign policy for being responsible for this attack. If you guys weren't bombing everybody and trying to start wars in literally every possible region. I actually, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Bolton was the UN ambassador at that point. Don't quote me on that. I just know it's like late in the Bush years where he gets a brief period to be UN ambassador. And if that's the case, it makes all the more sense that they would, think of the evil, hawkish American foreign policy, because he's been directly at the center of that for a while. Look it up. As a evil man. I didn't even know many people had the same name as him. That's the crazy part. Where you look his name up and you have to put the R in there because they think you might be talking about someone else. Yeah, he was UN ambassador at the time, so it doesn't surprise me. And that's not justification, because how people are. They go, "What do you mean by that?" It's not justification for what happened to that embassy, but it is saying, they're talking about the U.S. foreign policy sucking, and yeah, look who was there. So by 2011, the people of Syria get into these protests where they're calling for Assad to resign. And Assad responds by having these massive crackdowns and then giving concessions to some other people. And notably, at the time, President Obama says, "Hey, step down, get out of there, leave, withdraw, exit." Not that kind of terminology, but he does call for Assad to leave power. And in 3 years' time, 2014, the U.S. Begins its own international coalition in that region with the purpose of going after ISIL. And they've actually been found to have both to have airstriked individuals that were pro the Syrian government and against the Syrian government, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of being involved in the country, because you would think you pick a side and you fight for that side. They've harmed people from both sides. That's why I think airstrikes are stupid. But I'm the crazy one for not wanting random people to die. Let's look for anything else. But listen, since the year after we got involved there, so 2015, we've been supporting the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria and its armed wing with money, with other forms of resources. It's we've been completely backing them. So this is another conflict where no one does anything to the U.S., but because we have to stick our nose everywhere, and I do mean everywhere. We end up getting this. On April 4th, 2017, we had the Khan Sheikhoun chemical attack in Syria, where a chemical believed to be sarin was launched in this that town, and at least 89 people were killed, and over 500 were injured. This was the deadliest attack with chemical weapons in about 4 years. And in response, President Trump orders cruise missiles used against Syria. This draws support from Democrats and Republicans because the war machine is bipartisan. Russia criticizes the attack as being good news for terrorists. Notably, the president decided not to strike parts of where they landed purposely that were being controlled or containing things relating to Russia. And people will use that for their little RussiaGate conspiracy theory. On April 7th, 2018, we had the Duma chemical attack, which kills about half the number of people that the one the previous year had, 40 to 50. And a week later, Trump announces strikes against Syria, against Assad in response to this, with the United Kingdom and France. So the United States Special Representative for Syria Engagement, James Jeffrey, on December 17th of that year, announces that the U.S. will be in Syria for a long time. We're going to remain there for, some large period that he doesn't specify. But 2 days later, President Trump announces the U.S. has won, it has succeeded, and announces the withdrawal of 2,000 to 2,050, 2,500 troops. I supported this effort because, like I said, anytime we have these wasteful foreign conflicts, I'm backing it no matter who the president is. This was criticized by notably Republicans and Democrats. And if I may add commentary here, it's very unique in the era of people needing to just blindly support Trump or get kicked out of the Republican Party for them to actually take a stand and go, this is a bad move. This is a wrong idea. And it's really also sad because, when they say that, they're not doing it because they have some genuine policy position that is backed by fact or proof. No, because they're representing Boeing and these other defense contractor groups who give them money for their campaign so they can stay in office for another 10 to 20 years and keep the exact same stuff going on until then. So he really, this is, I think, one of the, if we get genuine biographers and historians to look at this event, it's one of the few times since his tenure began that I have seen the condemnation over an action. You get all these people who get mad about the comments he made in Charlottesville, the comments he made about the four congresswomen, and the comments he made about Cummings, and the comments he made about Warren. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter as much as policy. It never will. Policy directly dictates how many people die, how many people live, how many people are left alone. And it's so creepy that I have to say that. I would think that these grown individuals, whether they're political commentators or they're actual members of Congress, would be able to understand that. And you play right into the position of a lot of these Trump supporters because their whole thing of him is he's not like the rest. He's going to say how he feels, not be rehearsed. And that's why he's so authentic, even though it's all part of a ruse. But, by them getting upset over something as minimal as rhetoric, they allow themselves to be swindled, into playing into his narrative of, this person who's not like the rest that just says it like it is, no matter how incorrect it might actually be. So on February 22nd of this year, rather of 2019, the United States announces that instead of just taking all the troops out like they said they would because they're liars, they're going to keep 400 troops there as part of a residual force that is just going to stay there no matter what happens for whatever reason. I made a video about this. I thought this was really stupid. It was just, it didn't make any sense to me because I couldn't fathom how we could say we're going to get out of here and get everyone excited about getting out of here, other than these stupid politicians who get money from these conflicts. And then for whatever reason decide to reverse course. It almost makes, this is why I said I can't trust a lot of American politicians, because they say something a month, and then another month passes, new story. I have one more thing to add here. This is the report by the Defense Department's Office of Inspector General, which found that between April and June of 2019, the so-called Islamic State consolidated its power in Iraq and mounted a resurgence in Syria. And their analysis was that by Trump pulling the number of troops that he did out of there, this had supposedly caused uh, the United States to have a harder time containing ISIS, which by, but it's all part of their warmongering nonsense. Just send some more troops over here and we'll be able to deal with this. So yeah, we're presently 3 years into Trump's tenure, or rather 2.5, if you want to get technical. And the Syrian U.S. involvement, or rather the U.S.'s involvement in Syria, began in 2014. So we now have a 5-year, two-president, bipartisan conflict. And I keep trying to explain this to people that, you know, one party changing and taking over doesn't mean anything when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. Like you heard the part where Bush put sanctions on Syria in 2004, and then a few years later, Obama puts them back on. And Obama and Trump both have anti-Assad rhetoric, calling basically for a regime change, um, which isn't as bad as what's been advocated in Venezuela, where we're going to come over there and tell you who your leader is anyway. But the point is that it still is a foreign country trying to assert its will somewhere it has no place. And people, they just want to believe that there's some difference here, and there isn't. Like, these last three presidents have all pushed for conflict with Syria. Go watch that 2006 interview of Assad, where they ask him about the regime change efforts of the United States toward his reign. This has been going on since I was a little kid, if not before my time. And it's pathetic that people can't see that.